What if your greatest achievement became the reason they tried to destroy you? Malcolm Knight built his empire from the ground up. No shortcuts, no favors, just relentless hard work. But the moment he won too big, the system came crashing down on him. A rigged interview, a public takedown, a betrayal he never saw coming. They wanted to erase him, but they made one mistake. They underestimated him. Stay until the end to see how Malcolm turned the tables on his enemies. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Inspiring Stories Told for more powerful narratives. Malcolm Knight sat in his corner office, the skyline of Atlanta stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The golden hues of sunset reflected off the buildings, a picture of success, power, and prestige, everything he had worked for. And yet, the victory felt hollow. Just hours earlier, Knight Tech Industries had secured a historic $250 million defense contract, outbidding legacy corporations that had dominated the industry for decades. Companies with generations of wealth, political connections, and an unspoken monopoly over government deals. But this time, the contract had gone to him, a black man, a self-made entrepreneur who had fought tooth and nail to build his empire from the ground up. Malcolm should have been celebrating. His team had worked tirelessly, crafting the most advanced encryption security software on the market. The win wasn't just deserved, it was undeniable. Knight Tech had outperformed every competitor, and the numbers didn't lie. But the headlines told a different story. Did diversity quotas play a role in Knight Tech's historic win? Industry giants shocked as upstart black-owned firm snags $250 million government deal. Knight Tech, a tech titan or a political token? Malcolm clenched his jaw as he scrolled through the articles. There was no mention of the years of sleepless nights, the times he had to scrape together funds, or the doors that had slammed in his face before he broke through. They weren't questioning his work, they were questioning his right to succeed. His phone buzzed. Ava Williams, his PR advisor and closest confidant, had been calling nonstop since the announcement. He answered on the third ring. "You're seeing it, right?" she asked, voice tight with frustration. "Yeah." A beat of silence. "They're not inviting you to celebrate, Malcolm," she said, voice softer this time. "They're inviting you to destroy you." He exhaled sharply. "I know. They're setting a trap. They want you emotional, defensive. They want you to slip up so they can say, 'See? This is why we don't let people like him play in our space.'" Malcolm rubbed his temple, his exhaustion pressing against him like a weight. "I'm not new to this game, Ava." "I know you're not," she said. "But that doesn't mean they won't come harder than ever." She wasn't wrong. Malcolm had fought institutional bias and systemic barriers at every stage of his career, but now he was stepping into an entirely new battlefield. The moment he won too big, the moment he threatened the status quo, they stopped ignoring him and started targeting him. A knock at the door pulled his attention. David, his assistant, stood in the doorway, face tense. "Sir," he said, voice hesitant. "You should see this." Malcolm stood and took the white envelope from David's outstretched hand. There was no return address, no markings, just his name, scrawled in sharp, jagged handwriting. He tore it open, his gut already knowing what was coming. A single sheet of paper. "You should have stayed in your lane." The room seemed to shrink. The words weren't a threat, they were a warning. Ava's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Malcolm, you still there?" He stared at the letter for a long moment before answering. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "I'm here." By the next morning, Malcolm's inbox was flooded with requests for interviews, panel discussions, and opinion pieces. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of him. But one name stood out. Victoria Steele. The email was polished, professional, an invitation to appear on the Steele Report, one of the most watched primetime news shows in the country. The subject line framed it as a conversation on diversity in business. Malcolm snorted. He knew a setup when he saw one. Victoria Steele was a veteran journalist with a reputation for cutting down guests under the guise of fair debate. She was sharp, relentless, and masterful at turning public perception against people she wanted to discredit. Ava stormed into his office minutes later, tablet in hand. Please tell me you're not considering this. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, tossing the email aside. I haven't decided. Ava's eyes narrowed. There's nothing to decide. You don't go. Malcolm folded his hands, considering. Ignoring it doesn't make the problem go away. Going on live TV and getting ambushed doesn't either. Ava shot back. Victoria Steele isn't inviting you to talk. Malcolm, she's inviting you to justify your own existence. Malcolm ran a hand over his face. He knew Ava was right. This wasn't a discussion, it was an interrogation. Look, I get it, Ava continued, voice softer now. You want to control your own narrative. You want to face it head on. But this isn't just about logic, Malcolm. It's about optics. And the minute you step into that chair, they've already framed the conversation against you. Malcolm stared at the Steele Report logo on his screen. He could almost hear Victoria's voice already, laced with polite condescension, pretending to be neutral while feeding him to the wolves. Ava leaned forward. Tell me you're not seriously thinking about this. Malcolm sighed. I'm not afraid of the truth. Ava exhaled sharply. Yeah? Well, the truth doesn't always set people like us free. Silence. Then a knock at the door. David again. This time, his face wasn't just tense, it was alarmed. Sir, he said, hesitant. Security just called. There's a man outside your house. He's been there since last night. Ava's expression turned ice cold. Malcolm felt it before he understood it, the weight of being watched, being hunted. Did they approach him? Malcolm asked. David shook his head. They tried. He walked off before they could reach him. But he's been back 3 times. Malcolm's pulse thudded in his ears. He had faced racism, bias, corporate sabotage, but this was different. Malcolm, Ava said carefully. This isn't just about an interview anymore. Malcolm nodded slowly. He knew. It never was. Malcolm Knight stepped out of the black SUV, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. The air outside KXNE Studios in Los Angeles was crisp, but the tension coiling inside his chest was suffocating. This wasn't just another interview. It was a setup. The cold sterility of the studio lobby hit him like a blast of artificial air. The receptionist, a thin woman with hollow eyes, barely looked up when he checked in. The staff moved around him like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, their smiles forced and fleeting. Something was off. A producer, a tall man in a headset, gestured toward the hallway. Mr. Knight, we'll get you mic'd up now. Malcolm followed, his instincts screaming at him to turn around. As soon as he entered the dimly lit prep room, an audio tech clipped a mic to his lapel without a word. Malcolm glanced down at the small LED indicator. It was already hot. They were recording him before he even stepped on set. His fists clenched. They weren't here for a conversation. They were here for a soundbite. A thin, well-dressed woman stepped into the room. Victoria Steele. Her smile was warm, practiced, the kind of smile a predator gives its prey right before the strike. Malcolm, thank you for coming, she said, extending a manicured hand. We're honored to have you. He shook it, feeling the false sincerity in her grip. Appreciate the invite, he said smoothly, matching her energy. She gestured toward the stage. Shall we? As they walked onto the set, Malcolm took in the surroundings. The bright studio lights, the sleek, modern set, the silent hum of cameras hovering like watchful sentinels. The glass coffee table between their seats gleamed under the spotlight. A set meant to look warm and inviting, but Malcolm knew it was a cage. Victoria took her seat, crossing her legs with effortless grace. We're living 3-2. The red light blinked on. Good evening, America. Victoria's voice softened into her signature journalistic lilt. Tonight, we're joined by Malcolm Knight, tech entrepreneur, CEO of Knight Tech Industries, and the man at the center of one of the most talked about business deals of the year. She turned to him with a polished smile. Malcolm, congratulations on your recent success. Malcolm gave a slow nod. Thank you, Victoria. My team and I have worked hard for this. The first few minutes played out as expected. Victoria posed polite, easy questions about his company's growth, his background, the technological advancements Knight Tech had developed. Malcolm allowed himself to relax. Just a little. Then, the shift. Victoria straightened slightly, flipping through her cue cards. "And of course, Malcolm," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Not everyone sees this contract as just business." Malcolm's stomach tightened. "Here it comes." Victoria smiled, a blade hidden in silk. "Some critics," she continued, "say that your company benefited from federal diversity initiatives, programs designed to increase minority-owned business participation in government contracts." She let the words linger, watching him. "They argue that your success wasn't just about merit, but about the government choosing image over expertise." Malcolm felt the tension sharpen in the room. The producers behind the cameras exchanged quick glances. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they expected him to stumble. Malcolm let a beat pass before he responded. "I've heard that argument before," he said, voice measured. "It's funny, though. When a white-owned firm wins a contract, no one asks if their last name helped. No one wonders if their father's connections at the country club had something to do with it. But when a black entrepreneur wins, suddenly it's not about talent. It's about special treatment." Victoria's perfectly trained expression didn't flinch, but Malcolm saw it, the slight flicker in her eyes. She hadn't expected him to be this sharp, this ready. "That's an interesting perspective," she said smoothly. "But surely, you recognize that diversity programs exist to help level the playing field." "The playing field was never level to begin with," Malcolm cut in. The air in the room thickened. Victoria held her polished smile, but behind her, a producer shifted uncomfortably. They wanted him rattled. But he was winning. Then, she played her next card. "Malcolm," she said, turning slightly toward the camera, "we actually have a special guest who might be able to offer some insight into this conversation." Malcolm's brows knitted. A second chair was brought onto the stage. "Please welcome a longtime leader in the business world, a man who has worked closely with minority entrepreneurs, Jonathan Green." The breath left Malcolm's body. Jonathan Green stepped onto the set. The man who had once been Malcolm's mentor. The man who had advised him when he was a struggling entrepreneur fighting to be taken seriously. The man who had once told him, "We have to stick together in rooms like these." And yet, his face wasn't warm. It was unreadable. Malcolm's heart pounded. "Jonathan," Victoria greeted him. "Thank you for being here." "Always a pleasure," Jonathan said, settling into his seat. Victoria turned back to Malcolm. "Jonathan has known you for years. He's seen your journey firsthand, and he has some thoughts." Malcolm already knew what was coming. Jonathan folded his hands, sighing lightly. "Look, I have nothing but respect for Malcolm," he began. "But," Malcolm said, voice quiet. Jonathan hesitated. Then, the dagger. "But I also know that none of us get here alone. And I think it's important to acknowledge that Malcolm's journey, while impressive, was not without certain advantages." Malcolm's stomach twisted. "Advantages?" he echoed. Jonathan nodded. "Programs designed to elevate minority entrepreneurs, networking circles that prioritize diversity hires, investment firms eager to back Black-led companies." Malcolm felt the breath leave his chest. He had expected a fight from Victoria. He hadn't expected a knife in the back. Jonathan was legitimizing the very argument Victoria had set up. He was saying that Malcolm had been given a handout. The betrayal burned. Across the set, producers watched hungrily, cameras zooming in to catch Malcolm's reaction. This was the moment. They wanted to see him crack. But Malcolm didn't give them the satisfaction. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Jonathan," he said, voice controlled, "I appreciate everything you've done for me." "I do." Jonathan nodded slightly, like he was doing Malcolm a favor. "But let's be clear," Malcolm continued, his voice turning sharper, firmer. "You and I both know that if I had failed, those same people claiming I had help wouldn't have given a damn. They would have called it proof that people like me weren't ready for this space." Jonathan shifted. Malcolm turned to Victoria. "You want to talk about advantages? Let's talk about them. Let's talk about the CEOs born into billion-dollar families, the ones who inherit companies instead of building them. Let's talk about the banks that approve loans for white founders while denying them to black entrepreneurs with the same credentials. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. The studio fell silent, and Malcolm knew the game had changed. What are you feeling right now? Frustration? Anger? Betrayal? Imagine working your entire life, fighting against every closed door, only to have your success questioned and undermined the moment you make it. Was Malcolm's victory truly about merit, or was it just a convenience for the system? And if diversity programs helped him, does that erase his years of sacrifice? Why is black success always met with suspicion, while privilege is accepted without question? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should Malcolm have walked away, or was this fight necessary to expose the truth? Let's talk. Victoria Steele wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, her sharp eyes studying Malcolm like a scientist examining a test subject. She had found a crack in his armor, and now she was twisting the blade. There's another conversation happening, she said smoothly. Some believe that black entrepreneurs get more media attention than their white counterparts. That the narrative of overcoming struggle is more marketable than the thousands of white business owners who work just as hard but don't get the same headlines. Malcolm felt a heat rise in his chest, slow and seething. This was the game. First, they said he didn't deserve his success. Now they were saying he got too much attention for it. His fingers curled into his palm, but he didn't let the anger show. He forced himself to exhale slowly. He knew the moment he let emotion slip through, they'd weaponize it against him. Victoria's lips curled slightly at the edges, as if sensing his restraint. But let's take a look at something, she continued. She turned toward the massive screen behind them as it flickered to life. A video clip. Malcolm felt his stomach tighten. They hadn't mentioned playing a clip. The footage was grainy, taken from a panel discussion Malcolm had done months ago on racism in the tech industry. In the clip, he was frustrated, passionate, but not angry. He had been speaking about the lack of black executives in Silicon Valley, the barriers black entrepreneurs faced in securing funding, and the subtle, unspoken gatekeeping that locked people like him out of billion-dollar opportunities. But Victoria's team had edited it. The clip cut out the context, leaving only the moments where Malcolm appeared intense, his tone sharper, his expression harder. They had turned his call for equity into an image of hostility. Some might say Victoria's voice was almost mocking, that this isn't about race, it's about resentment toward larger corporations. That instead of celebrating success, you're fueling division. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He saw the trap. They were framing him as the angry black man, ungrateful, combative, and impossible to please. The real-time reactions online were already shifting. His phone, set to silent in his pocket, buzzed violently. The studio's producers had screens displaying live social media updates, and Malcolm caught glimpses of the comments flashing across them. Here we go again. Why is it always about race? He should just be happy with what he got. This is why people don't hire activists. A slow, creeping sickness crawled through his stomach. They were turning the entire country against him, and he couldn't stop it. Victoria watched him carefully, waiting for him to lash out, waiting for him to confirm everything they wanted people to believe. Malcolm forced himself to smile. It's funny, he said, his voice even, how when black people talk about barriers, we're called divisive. But when white billionaires complain about taxes, they're called visionaries. Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly. Malcolm saw it. He had landed a hit, but it wouldn't be enough. The damage was already done. The interview ended, but the nightmare was just beginning. Malcolm walked backstage, his mind racing. His reputation was burning in real time. He pulled out his phone. Hundreds of notifications. Ava's name appeared. He answered immediately. Malcolm, she breathed, her voice urgent. I know, he said, already anticipating what she was about to say. They set me up. No, her voice was sharp. It's worse. Malcolm frowned. What do you mean? Ava hesitated. Your home address was leaked online. The words sent a sharp bolt of panic through his chest. What? Someone posted it on Twitter, she said quickly. It's spreading. His pulse hammered. His mind flashed to his house, his quiet neighborhood, the sanctuary he had built after years of fighting his way up. A home that now wasn't safe. Then, his phone vibrated with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something in his gut told him to. Slowly, he pressed the phone to his ear. Silence. Then, a soft, distorted voice. "You're next." The call ended. The air in Malcolm's lungs vanished. He stared at his phone screen, his vision narrowing. This wasn't just media spin. This was an attack. A coordinated effort to destroy him, not just professionally, but physically. His grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. Ava's voice pulled him back. "Malcolm," he swallowed hard. "I need to get out of here." "I already called your security team," she said quickly. "They're heading to your house now. Do not go home." "Where do I go?" "We'll figure it out," she said. "But right now, get out of there." Malcolm turned to the exit, his entire body tense. As he stepped outside the studio, the night air hit him like a slap. The streetlights buzzed. The world felt too quiet. Then, a sudden movement from the corner of his eye. A figure in a hoodie stepped out from the shadows. Malcolm barely had time to react before a heavy object flew through the air. A brick. It slammed into the hood of his car with a sickening thud. Malcolm's breath caught. His muscles coiled instinctively, his mind screaming at him to move. The figure was already running, disappearing into the dark alley. His driver rushed forward, eyes wide. "Sir, are you okay?" Malcolm stared at the dented hood, his heart pounding in his ears. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. The people behind this didn't just want to ruin his name. They wanted him to be afraid. And for the first time in his entire career, he was. Malcolm sat in his office, the blinds drawn, his phone vibrating relentlessly on the desk in front of him. Each call, each email, each message carried the same theme: rejection, hesitation, or outright abandonment. His investors were backing out. His clients were pulling their contracts. His own board members were questioning his leadership. The fallout from the Steele report was worse than he had anticipated. The edited video clip Victoria had aired was being played on every major network, fueling the growing narrative that Malcolm was ungrateful, divisive, and hostile. Nitek had once been seen as a rising star in the tech industry. Now, it was being labeled a political risk. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists as he stared at his phone screen. His inbox was filled with corporate PR statements, carefully worded apologies, and vague explanations. One email stood out. Subject: Urgent. Contract Termination Center. Harold Green, CEO, GreenTech Cybersecurity. Malcolm opened it, his pulse pounding. "Malcolm, we regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be discontinuing our partnership with Nitek Industries. While we have valued our collaboration, we must prioritize stability for our stakeholders. Wishing you the best in your future endeavors." Malcolm's teeth clenched. Harold Green, a man who had once praised Malcolm for being the future of cybersecurity, was now treating him like a liability. Like he was radioactive. The phone rang. "Ava, tell me you're not reading those emails," she said the moment he answered. "How can I not?" Malcolm muttered. His voice was tight, barely restrained. Ava sighed, frustration and exhaustion tangled in her breath. "You knew this would happen, Malcolm." "That doesn't make it any easier," he admitted. "Look, I need you to listen to me," Ava said, her voice lower now, urgent. "You need to lay low, at least for now. Let this storm pass." Malcolm let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Lay low? So what?" "Let them bury me while I sit in the dark." "It's not about hiding," she insisted. "It's about choosing the right moment to fight back. Right now, they're expecting you to react emotionally. They want you to lash out so they can point at you and say, 'See? He's unhinged.' You have to be smart." Malcolm knew she was right, but he wasn't built for silence. "They want to destroy me, Ava," he said. His voice was low, fierce, something simmering beneath his words. "They don't just want my company gone. They want to make an example out of me." Ava exhaled, hesitant. "Then you need leverage." As if on cue, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number. Check your email. I have proof. The truth is bigger than you think. A second later, an email notification popped up. Subject: urgent. They set you up, sender. Rogue Source 54. Malcolm opened it, his eyes scanning the words. His heart slammed against his ribs. Internal emails. Dozens of them. The documents revealed a coordinated effort, a conspiracy between Senator William Carter, Victoria Steele's media team, and several powerful corporate executives. It was all there. The Steele report was never meant to be an interview. It had been pre-planned as a takedown. Emails between Carter's office and media producers showed them crafting the questions together to manipulate the public narrative. Corporate leaders from old money tech firms were involved. They had pressured investors and clients to pull out from Knight Tech, making it seem like a natural collapse. They wanted Malcolm out of the industry. Permanently. Malcolm's blood turned ice cold. Ava's voice broke through the silence. Malcolm? What is it? He took a breath. A deep, steadying breath. I have the smoking gun, he said. It didn't take long for the leaks to explode across the internet. Within hours, the hashtag exposed the system was trending worldwide. Journalists were scrambling to cover the scandal, publishing articles dissecting every detail of the exposed conspiracy. Shocking leaked emails reveal coordinated attack against black CEOs, Senator Carter, big tech, and media elites accused of targeting Malcolm Knight. Was the Steele report a smear campaign? The public turned. The very same viewers who had once questioned Malcolm's legitimacy were now outraged. People flooded Victoria Steele's social media accounts, demanding accountability. Sponsors began pulling ads from her show. Meanwhile, Senator Carter went silent. His office released a weak statement denying any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. For the first time in days, Malcolm felt like he was breathing again. Ava called, her voice breathless. We flipped the script, Malcolm. We flipped it. But he wasn't celebrating yet. Because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. His phone rang again. A call from a high-profile television network. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional. Mr. Knight, given the recent revelations, we'd like to offer you an exclusive televised special. A one-on-one, no interruptions to tell your side of the story. Primetime slot. Malcolm's fingers tapped against his desk. This was the opportunity. Ava's voice rang in his mind. They'll come at you harder. And she was right. If he accepted, they would fight back viciously. But this time, he would be ready. Let's do it, Malcolm said. His voice was calm, steady. But on my terms. The studio lights burned down on him, hot and unrelenting. Millions of eyes would be watching. This wasn't just another interview. This was his moment. Malcolm sat in the chair across from Eleanor West, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for pulling no punches, but playing fair. Unlike Victoria Steele, Eleanor wasn't a tool of the system. She was known for exposing corruption, for amplifying voices that others tried to silence. She leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk between them. The cameras were rolling. We're here tonight with Malcolm Knight, she began, her voice even. A name you've been hearing everywhere this past week. A tech entrepreneur, a CEO, and now a man at the center of a national firestorm. Malcolm exhaled slowly, his shoulders squared, his heartbeat steady. This was it. Malcolm, let's get right to it, Eleanor continued. Your recent interview with Victoria Steele led to an uproar. Afterward, leaked documents revealed a coordinated effort between powerful politicians, media elites, and major corporations to discredit you and other black executives. Many are calling it one of the most damning scandals in recent history. What do you make of it? Malcolm's eyes held hers. He would not flinch. I make of it exactly what it is, he said, his voice clear. Proof that the system was never designed for people like me to succeed. Silence. The air in the studio thickened. Eleanor nodded. And when you say people like you, I mean black entrepreneurs. I mean first-generation business owners who weren't born into billionaire families, who didn't grow up with corporate legacies or old money networks. You know, it's funny. Malcolm leaned slightly forward, his voice sharpening. When a white CEO lands a government contract, No one asks if they got it because of who they know. No one wonders if they had help getting there. Eleanor didn't interrupt. But when I win, suddenly I have to defend myself. Suddenly, it's not about my work. It's about whether I belong at the table at all. His words rippled through the airwaves. He wasn't just speaking to Eleanor. He was speaking to every person who had ever been told they were only successful because of some imaginary handout. Eleanor folded her hands. You faced backlash for being outspoken about racial inequality in the business world. Some people called you angry. Others said you were playing the victim. What do you say to those critics? Malcolm chuckled dryly. Oh, I know exactly what they're saying. I've read the tweets, the think pieces, the opinion columns. They say I should just focus on my success and stop talking about race. He shook his head. Let me ask you something, Eleanor. She lifted a brow. If I had lost everything this week, if Knight Tech had crumbled, do you think those same people would be saying race doesn't matter? He let the question linger. No. They would have called it proof that black executives aren't capable of running major corporations. He shifted, his gaze piercing through the cameras. He knew who was watching. He wanted them to feel this. But if I succeed, they say it's special treatment. So which is it? If I fail, I was never good enough. If I win, it's because the system helped me. So tell me. He leaned forward, his voice steady, unshakable. When do we ever just belong? The studio was silent. The weight of his words sank into the walls, into the airwaves, into the living rooms of every viewer in the country. Eleanor let out a slow breath. That's a powerful statement, Malcolm. It's not a statement, he said. It's reality. The internet exploded before the interview even ended. Hashtag When Do We Belong began trending worldwide. Clips of Malcolm's words flooded social media, spreading like wildfire. Some called him brave. Some called him radical. Some called him right. But for the first time, no one could ignore him. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, Senator William Carter's office released a statement, a weak, panicked attempt at damage control. I had no knowledge of any coordinated effort against Mr. Knight. These allegations are completely unfounded. It didn't matter. By noon, the Justice Department announced an investigation into corruption in government contracts. Victoria Steele? Suspended indefinitely. The network released a statement distancing themselves from her, citing serious concerns regarding journalistic integrity. Corporate executives who had pulled out of Knight Tech? Now they were scrambling. Malcolm, I think we should discuss revisiting our partnership. We deeply regret any misunderstanding. Let's move forward with a clean slate. Malcolm didn't even bother responding. They had shown their true colors. He wasn't interested in going backward. Knight Tech survived. More than that, it thrived. In the weeks that followed, Malcolm's phone didn't stop ringing. Not with apologies, but with opportunities. Investors who had once dismissed him? Now they wanted in. Politicians who had ignored him? Now they wanted meetings. People who had doubted him? Now they were forced to listen. He didn't trust all of them. But now he had power. Ava sat across from him in his office, scrolling through headlines. She smirked. You realize you just changed the entire conversation about race and business in this country, right? Malcolm exhaled, glancing out the window. The city lights shimmered below, stretching into the horizon. They tried to silence me. He turned back to her, his expression steeled, unbreakable. Now they have to hear me. Malcolm Knight's story wasn't just about one man standing up to corruption. It was about a system that has spent generations deciding who gets to win and who gets left behind. It was about every black entrepreneur, every self-made success story, every person of color who has had to work twice as hard just to be seen as equal. His journey exposed a truth that many already knew but few dared to say out loud, that success isn't just about talent. It's about access. It's about power. And most of all, it's about who is allowed to rise without question. Think about it. How many times have we seen mediocre CEOs fail upwards, running companies into the ground and walking away with million-dollar severance packages? How many times have we seen people from wealthy families handed opportunities on a silver platter, only to be praised as brilliant and self-made? And yet, When someone like Malcolm succeeds, the world demands an explanation. Who helped him? Did he really deserve it? Was it just diversity quotas? This is the double standard that fuels systemic racism. It's not about whether black people can be great. It's about why the world refuses to believe it when they are. Malcolm's story is a reminder that silence is never an option. They tried to destroy him, to erase everything he built, to reduce him to a headline that would be forgotten in a week. But instead, he turned their attack into his power. And that's the real lesson here. You can't fight for your place in this world by playing by the rules of a system that was never meant to include you. Sometimes, you have to break the rules. Sometimes, you have to rewrite them entirely. The question is, are you ready to do the same? Because this isn't just about Malcolm. This is about all of us. Every person who has ever been told to stay in their lane. Every dreamer who was made to feel like they didn't belong in the spaces they fought their way into. Every fighter who has had to climb through fire just to get a seat at the table, only to be told they should be grateful for the scraps. If you've ever felt that, then this story was for you. But don't just watch, be part of the movement. Like this video if you believe in truth over lies. Comment below if you've ever had to fight harder than others just to prove you belong. And if you want to see more stories that expose injustice, that inspire change, that push back against the system, hit that subscribe button. Because this was just the beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.